Joining me now is Senator James Paterson, who, along with fellow Liberal MP Andrew Hastie, was banned from travelling to China late last year after speaking out about the country's human rights abuses and the Chinese Communist Party's actions in our region. Welcome to the program, Senator Paterson.
Thank you, Rita.
Now, probably did you a favour there banning you, because you were looking to travel around December, and we now know that coronavirus was already present at that time. What do you think about our response to it? Because there has been criticism of our approach, particularly the plan to take several hundred people from the Wuhan region and put them on Christmas Island for a 2-week period. That's been criticised by several doctors and
Anthony Albanese,
former human rights commissioners. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I've seen a bit of politics around this today, Rita, and there's lots of conspiracy theories about why the government would be doing this plan. And I was particularly disappointed to see Anthony Albanese raising these questions. This is actually a very serious matter of our national health and really our national security. We don't play games with this. I mean, I know why people are cynical about politicians and critical about politicians, and they're entitled to be. But honestly, on something like this, we're not going to play games. This would not be done without following the best advice. And we're taking our advice from the Department of Health and the scientists in there who work on these issues, and from the World Health Organization. So this is nothing other than what we think is the best approach to a very challenging situation.
Now, there's been criticisms from several angles. As Anthony Albanese, you could say there's a politically motivated attack, but someone like Karen Phelps, former MP, she's saying that Christmas Island's medical facilities would not be able to cope with an outbreak of this virus. What's your response to
I'm not sure how she
Phelps?
informed herself of the facts of that. In fact, at the moment, Rita, we have medical teams on their way to Christmas Island from the Australian mainland, so they are ready when people arrive. We are not going to send people there with inadequate or inappropriate medical care. We're going to only send them there to receive the absolute best medical care.
And there's also been criticism from a racial point of view, saying that these Australian residents and citizens are being treated differently because of their Chinese background. Tim Paterson, I don't want to mispronounce his name because he claims that's racist. He's the former race discrimination commissioner, and he says that perhaps if they weren't of Chinese descent, they wouldn't be sent to Christmas Island for that 2-week period. Would they be able to come to the mainland? Are there options to bring them back to the mainland and have them in quarantine here rather than have them at Christmas Island?
That's a really disappointing and really silly intervention by Tim Paterson, and it's consistent with the way that he behaved when he was the Race Commissioner. He really seeks to drive identity politics and to divide Australians. No one getting on board the flight to leave Wuhan will be assessed on their ethnicity, whether they are an Australian of Chinese origin or an Australian of any other origin. They will be getting on the same flight to the same place for the same reasons. It's got nothing to do with their ethnicity at all, and it's frankly dangerously irresponsible for him to raise those sort of issues.
Well, I'll read out the tweet that he sent, so I don't want to be misquoting him in any way, but he sent a tweet saying, "Yes, this is complex, but Australian citizens deserve better from their government." This from one citizen, and there's a quote there: "The government wouldn't send its citizens to Christmas Island Detention Centre if those who are trapped in Wuhan were white Australians." So that's a quote that he's tweeted there. Now, as far as the people who are coming to Australia, who are already here, who have travelled through that Wuhan province, is there enough information, is there enough checks and balances to make sure that they're not getting on planes, they are not going into crowded restaurants, that they are keeping themselves at homes, having a self-quarantine, if you will, until they're declared safe? Because we are keeping reports about people getting on a plane who are suspected of being a carrier or going into a crowded place, and then that risk of contagion spreads.
Yeah, the government's taking an evidence-based approach here, Rita. We are following the best and most updated advice, and it gets constantly updated on an almost daily basis about the best way to handle these things, because we've got to get the balance right here between taking this threat very seriously, which we are, but not unnecessarily panicking and sending fear to people that is not needed. And one of the great things about living in a democracy and an open system is that you can see all that, it can be critiqued, it can be criticised from every point of view, and there's no doubt about our sincerity in the way we're going about that.
Well, that's my last question about coronavirus. Can we be sure that we have all the relevant data? Because as we know, this originates from China. Communist regimes aren't always transparent with what they know. They tell you what they want you to know. What is the Australian government doing to fully understand how this virus spreads and just the risk it poses to the Australian public?
It's a reasonable question, Rita, because there have been some reports that particularly earlier on, when the virus first emerged, that people who were whistleblowers about the virus had been pursued by the police and even arrested. But I listened very closely to comments made by the Chief Medical Officer today, and he said that he believes that the Chinese government is now being very upfront and very honest about that, that they've invited international experts from the World Health Organisation and elsewhere to come and observe, and so he believes we are getting the right information now.
Okay. Now, this week, Britain ignored advice from the US, Australia, from intelligence officials, and they're granting China's Huawei permission to build part of their 5G network. Does this jeopardise the transatlantic intelligence sharing, the Five Eyes intelligence arrangement? And what measures can we take to protect our nation from Huawei's influence?
I don't want to criticise an allied foreign government, and I absolutely respect the sovereign right of the UK government to make its own decisions about this. But the Australian government, and in fact on both sides of politics, within the Labor Party and within the Liberal Party, there is absolutely no regrets at all about the two decisions that we've made in recent history to block Huawei from participating first in the NBN and secondly in the 5G network. And we did it for very good reasons, based on very good intelligence advice, and we were not confident that they could be incorporated into either of those networks without posing a threat to effectively our digital sovereignty, effectively the freedom and the privacy and the security of all Australians who are going to be incredibly reliant on those two networks, and 5G in particular, due to its very nature of connecting to everything. They're going to be very reliant on that, and we have to be absolutely certain that it can be safe and secure.
But surely this does jeopardise the Five Eyes intelligence arrangement. If you've got one of the five nations allowing Huawei that entry into the system, doesn't that put us at risk also?
The Five Eyes relationship is probably our most important security relationship, and Australia gains a great deal from it. We get access to intelligence that, as a medium-sized country, we would never normally have access to, and the ease of sharing information historically between those five countries has been absolutely first-rate. It's almost seamless, and that's an extraordinary thing. I saw comments by the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo today, who's in London, saying that the US was carefully assessing what the implications were for intelligence sharing. I'm sure the same thing is happening here in Australia, but I'm also sure that we want to take every step possible not to jeopardise what is a really great and really important relationship.
Well, staying in Britain, we're Brexit Eve over there, hours away from leaving the EU. You were one of the, well, I think you were the only federal MP who was in support of Brexit at one point, much to the disappointment of Malcolm Turnbull and Julie Bishop at that time, and you gave a speech that went viral in support of Brexit. How do you see it? Is it what you hoped it would be, or is this a watered-down Brexit?
I read it. Today is a great day for freedom, it's a great day for democracy, and it's a great day for sovereignty. Finally, the people of the UK are taking back control, as they were promised that they would have the opportunity to 4 years ago. Finally, the British Parliament is honouring the intention and the will of the British people, now clearly expressed in a referendum and 2 subsequent elections. And that's a great thing. That's a really good thing. Yes, there's still some process to get through. There's a transition period, but that really important first step has been taken. And I think, honestly, the most important thing of all is that the oldest parliament in the world, the British Parliament in Westminster, is now again the only and the supreme lawmaking body for the people of the United Kingdom. No longer is effectively an unaccountable and remote capital making laws for the British people, and every country should have that freedom.
Well, that's what's surprising. Seems straightforward, but at a time it was almost unanimous within Australian politics that Brexit was a terrible idea. You had coalition MPs who are now saying they're supporters of it, very much against. So what do you think's changed? Have they been led by the public's opinion, or what's forced that change?
My view at the time, Rita, as you say, it wasn't a popular one, but I thought it was very clear that it was both in the interest of the UK to leave the EU, and equally importantly, as an Australian parliamentarian, I thought it was in Australia's interest for the UK to leave the EU. One of the great dividends of Brexit that we are now seeing is that Australia is at the front of the queue to negotiate a free trade agreement with the UK. And our Trade Minister, Simon Birmingham, has already been over to London for initial talks. From now onwards, official talks can begin, and I think very quickly we'll get a very high quality deal that liberalises trade in goods, services, and I also hope significantly liberalises immigration arrangements between Australia and the UK. It should be easy for Australians to go to the UK and vice versa, whether that's for tourism, whether that's for business, whether that's for work or for study. It should be really easy, and it hasn't been easy since the UK entered the EU because they've surrendered control over their immigration system when being part of the EU, unfortunately.
That's put us off into that line. That was
exactly, but that's been fixed. That's the first dividend of Brexit. We're not in the other line at Heathrow anymore. We're in the Friendly Nations line at Heathrow.
Excellent. Now, closer to home, we've got a scorching hot day in Melbourne today, 40 plus, humidity, and yet we've got the national grid at risk, where the Australian energy market operators issued warning of a potential shortfall in generation. Do we have a clip from them?
If two major units failed during peak, we would be in a situation where we would probably just have enough to keep the system intact, and the concern would be if we lost a third unit, we could lose the whole system. So what we're worried about is if we lose two big units and we don't have enough reserves, because if there's not enough generation, then the whole system can go black.
This is pretty grim. If on a day like this, when you need your electricity supply to be reliable, that we could go black, we could have that mass blackout like we had last year, 200,000 homes and businesses without power on one of the hottest days of the year. We're paying exorbitant rates for electricity. How do we not have the reliability?
I guess the surprising thing, Rita, is that it's taken till the end of January for us to have a day like this. Actually, by historical standards, this has been a relatively mild Australian summer. We had that wonderful cool period, which was such a welcome thing for firefighters and for farmers, and a bit of rain, which has been great. But now we're getting to see some of those normal, traditional high temperatures that we see in summer. And you're right, Victorians in particular are entitled to be really frustrated that they pay so much for electricity and that there is a danger that they might have a brownout or even a blackout. They should expect good, high-quality, reliable electricity, and for the money that they're paying, and unfortunately they're not getting it.
Surely the federal government's got a role to play in this as well.
You're right, Rita, it's a shared responsibility, but actually constitutionally energy rests with the states, and they're the prime movers here. Definitely the federal government has got more involved in energy in recent years, and we've had to because there's some real problems in our energy system. And so yes, we've got a role to play, and there was a great agreement that's been announced today between the New South Wales government and the federal government that will make prices more stable and will also ensure that reliability. And I'd like to see the same sort of thing happen here in Victoria.
Well, we'll see, because I mean, we could end the day today with mass blackouts and people just suffering in 40-degree heat.
Hopefully only after your show's gone off air, though.
That's the key thing. Thank you, Senator Paterson, for joining us on the Friday show.